Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Gaming with Soul, a podcast. I forgot our tagline already. Go me! It's episode 2 and I forget the dang thing. Seeking soul through the lens of gaming and pop culture. My name is Jamie.
That's the one. And my name is Corinne.
On today's episode, we're kind of going to touch a little deeper on what we touched on last time. A mission statement, if you will, on top of everything. So yeah,
I think that's probably a good place to start. So, I mean, this has been your passion for a long time. And I mean, it kind of has been for me, but I'll go into that a little deeper in a moment because I think it's more important to focus on where you're coming from, because I think this is more our audience at this point. Yes, okay, I'm this weird woo-woo psychic, and I'm going to say a lot of stuff that people are going to go, "You're insane, woman," and I'll go, "Yeah, probably." But
that's fine. My wife is constantly like, "You're delusional," and I'm like, "Yes, but still."
Exactly. Actually, it's one of the big things that made a lot of difference to me came from a woman by the name of Sandra Ingerman, who is a very respectable shamanic teacher, and she says, it's hard often to tell the difference between what is imagination and what is intuition. And,
Yeah.
how do you know the difference between one or the other? And the truth of the matter is it's all imagination until it's validated otherwise. But even if it is just imagination, it doesn't make it any less powerful. And this is the
Yeah.
stuff that can activate our souls and activate our minds and help us connect into things deeper.
Yeah, I
So,
have
but
plenty of crazy stories about stuff like that.
oh, don't we both? But I think it's important to perhaps deepen in on who it is that you're trying to reach and why. So let's come at it from your side for a while.
Yeah, fair enough. So before we started recording today, we were having a little conversation as kind of a what we were going to do, and you had asked, "What is the point?" Like, because you wanted to know my opinion on it, and I gave a very, very impassioned thing that I probably won't be able to do now that we're recording because, nerves and what have you. But I said the point is, yeah, I'll try. The point is it's not about me. It's not about what I want. Like, yes, I want this to be successful. Yes, I would love to, I love the opportunity to work with you. Yes, I love all these things. But the reason I'm doing this and the reason this is so important to me is I want to reach those gamers out there, the few of them who are sitting alone in their office, they're sitting alone in their bedrooms, their living rooms, their mother's basements, they're wherever, and they're struggling with spirituality and faith and gaming and where those two intersect and the dangers and fraud. And even just the dangers and fraud on the spiritual side alone. I want to reach them and tell them there is a place for them. I want to show them that there is a home for them. They're not alone, and that's the big thing. Is for many years, I felt very alone, being somewhat spiritual, turning away from Christianity and a prominently Christian country, but state specifically. I live in Minnesota, like I said last episode, and I live like North Minnesota, not super north, but I'm over halfway up. And like I am surrounded by hardcore Christian Trump supporters. And not to say that all Christians support Trump or anything like that. I'm not trying to make that bold of a statement, but like
that's your demographic around your area.
That is the demographic around our area. There are a lot of like Trump during the last election, and still to this day, because nobody takes anything down here in Minnesota. There's a whole bunch of Trump supporting signs everywhere, and like on your drive into the small town I live in, there's a church that has a sign out front that always saying things like, if you don't have faith in God, everything's going to fall apart, and just very strong religious statements. And here I am, this little Norse boy who doesn't fit in. I really don't, with like even among my friend group. Like You look at my friends, they're either fairly hardcore Christian or atheist, which makes a very interesting mishmash of people.
Yeah.
Because like they commingle and we get along because we don't focus on those kind of things. Because that's not what defines our friendships. That just defines who we are.
Yeah.
And so there was a very long time where I was on the verge of spirituality. I'm an empath. I believe anyway that I have a touch of precognition, and that's because several things that I've dreamt or seen have, not exactly as I've dreamt or seen them, but have come to pass.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying when you don't have an outlet or a support group of any sort to handle that. And then on top of it, like all my gaming friends are like, that's weird. Not all of them though. There was a couple in my old WoW guild a long time ago who, when I described some of the things I was going through, they're like, yeah, you're an empath. We're empaths too. And then they never talked to me again. Because I am on the weirder side as a person. My imagination does run wild a lot of the times. I get very passionate about things, and then I go on long rants that people are just like, please stop talking. Or you're scaring the children. But
Again, that's kind of, I guess, a little bit of the difference as to where we are. I've come, being Australian, yes, there is a lot of religious people here, but it's certainly not as in your face, I believe, as you guys get it in the US and even in Europe, UK and places.
Oh, hell, when my ma and grandma find this podcast, I'll probably be excommunicated from my own family. Just kidding.
Well,
love you, Mom. Please don't hate me.
I mean, we mentioned this last week after we recorded the first one, how much I feel like I'm coming out.
Yep.
Because although my family is not terribly religious. If you want to get technical about it, you'd call them deists, where they have some kind of loose belief in God. But beyond that, they're more worried about you not being insane than they are about, belief systems and stuff. It was literally just my uncle's wife who was Pentecostal. And my uncle was very religious at one point, but the rest of them, the religious aspect wasn't as much of a thing. Yeah. But my coming forward, because even in spirituality, even in the psychic and spiritual circles, there are behaviors and things and ways of being that are acceptable.
Yeah.
And there are things that are not, and gaming is not acceptable in a lot of those psychic circles because it is seen as frivolous and time wasting. Yeah. And my
mom said it was frivolous and time wasting too.
Yeah, again, that's what we've been told. Anyone who used to love video games, but then remember that anyone who used to watch TV. Yeah. Anyone who didn't do anything that wasn't intellectually stimulating was wasting their time. Now, come on, we can't do intellectually stimulating 100% of the time. Our brains couldn't handle it. We all need our relaxing. I think before we go further, I think the reason it is important to acknowledge the importance of gaming and pop culture to who we are, not just our generations, but humanity in general, that gaming is another way that we weave our tales.
Yeah.
Let's think of it. We go back through human history. We go back prehistory, so before anything was written. Our stories, where the archetypes are drawn from nowadays, whether these be psychological archetypes, whether these be the divine archetypes, whichever way you want to look at it from, because it works both ways and you can take either direction here. But originally, all of these came from stories. The stories that we would sit around a campfire, huddled against the dark, and our elders would tell stories. And these would be stories usually connecting to the archetypes, stories about the heroes, stories about the warrior, stories about the mother, the father, the chieftain, the shaman, the high priestess,
The crone.
all of these, the crone, yes, the old witch that lives in the woods, the elements to be feared, the elements to be embodied, the elements that empower. These were our stories. And these elders would weave these tales. As we've gone through history, how these tales have woven have changed. But, especially as we're moving the last few hundred years, the fire is gone. The gathering together is gone. And of modern times, our stories come to us in a completely different format, which is through movies, through books, and through games.
Yeah.
And games need to be given more credit, because a movie, yes, we can sit together with some friends and watch a movie. We can go to a movie theatre and watch a movie, but the story is still being spoken at us.
Yeah.
The story is not interactive. The same with books. Sorry?
It's a very different thing to I think this is kind of inevitably where you're going, and that's why I was just going to back off, but it is a very different thing to sit and be told the hero's tale than to live it yourself through by proxy. Of course, in our modern world, we can't go out and slay dragons because, one, there isn't any, and two, people look at us funny when we dress in full plate mail and go running down the street. I know this as an SEA, former member of the SEA. You get real weird looks when you go into a gas station in full plate. Just saying.
Yeah, but that's also you've taken it to sort of the next step. But the first one is, yes, games are interactive stories. They allow us to experience the story of this particular archetype, whether it is the hero, whether it is the warrior, whether it is the sage or the shaman or the thief or whatever it is. It allows us to experience. And again, we spoke about this in our last podcast about, you may have those elements in your bloodline. You may have those elements in your soul that's calling out for you to embody that. You can also argue as to whether or not these or the games that you connected to helped you know who you are. And I think this is where we wanted to deepen into a little bit today and go through our history as to what called us and where that comes from. But at the end of the day, games are a really, really powerful way to embody the archetypes, to embody the stories. And one of the mission statements that we did want to make was we want the gaming industry to understand how important these stories are.
Yeah.
To do them in a way that is ethical and empowering, and know that, hey, these can be really meaningful to a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
And another goal I would love, granted, this is a pipe dream because, money's a thing and everyone loves it. I would love game developers to realize that, games aren't just about doing the thing. Sometimes they are, like Minecraft is about doing the thing, but they're not just about doing the thing. It's not just about, like, there has to be passion when you craft that story. There has to be feeling and emotion. Most games that come from nowhere and steal everyone's hearts are not the big box office games. I mean, sometimes they are, sure, but they're generally not the big box office games that make millions. Even the ones that make millions of dollars, they're usually forgotten a few years later. It's the ones that are crafted with passion and love. And because I mean, people still, one of the biggest game defining genres, and this is something I'll get into in a different episode eventually, but in my opinion, helped save the entire gaming industry was Dark Souls. And
Yeah.
that it was made with love from a, at the time, somewhat small development company that had only made, as far as I'm aware, one game before that that didn't get a lot of love. It had a following. There were people who did love it, very much so, but it didn't have the big following. And this was during what I like to call the dark age of gaming. Jim
Yeah.
Sterling, who is a very, very famous voice in the player industry, in the gaming world, as a critic. He's a very well-known critic. He always talked about the 3 C's of gaming. I believe that's where I got that from. It was either him or Yahtzee. Yahtzee was the other one who was working with him, another very big name. They talk about the 3 C's of gaming. I could be way off base, but I believe it was one of those two. Which was Call of Duty, Candy Crush, Clash of Clans, where every company at the time was trying to reproduce that game, one of those 3 games, to try to make all of the money, and it almost completely killed gaming altogether, because no one wants to play the game clone of a game that they love. They'll just play the game that they love.
Yeah. And that's something that we're going to dive really deep into in a future episode. We've got that one scheduled to really, really go deep into it, which is one that you're going to really dominate, because I have no clue.
Yeah.
All I can feed in is a little bit of mystic wisdom, but beyond that, yeah, that'll be one of your big topics.
Yeah.
So let's pull us back
fuck
into
Fortnite.
Yeah, you can do that one at that time as well.
Yeah. That'll probably be a separate episode in itself. Fuck Epic and fuck Fortnite.
So, especially I think because what we're looking, or who we're looking at talking to, is primarily, younger versions of ourselves. Why don't you go into, what hooked you, into elements of pop culture, into elements of gaming when you were a kid? What was it that hooked you in? What was it that saved you? What gave life? What games? What was it that called you in, and why? And then I'll share mine.
Okay, this will end up being a long rant, because there's a lot I can go into. It might not be as long as I think, but there's a lot I can go into. I know my first games I ever really played were things like Mario and Sonic and whatnot, and that was just kind of a do the thing, get reward. And I was kind of like, oh, this is kind of cool, but I didn't really get that into it.
I think most kids start with the platform games because anything too heavy just goes over their heads.
Yeah. And so like I would play around with platformers and stuff like that. And at the time too, like when I was young, it was the emergence of the Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. The Sega Genesis is the one I had. I didn't have a Nintendo. I really wish I did have a Nintendo looking back, because the games that really defined, and I'll get there, but the games that really defined who I am as a person in a lot of ways are the Final Fantasies.
Yeah.
And they started, of course, on the Nintendo, the original NES.
Yeah.
But we started with a Sega Genesis, and so my first real game was Sonic 2. And I played Sonic 2 so much I melted the plug-in box on my Sega. And so that broke and we had to buy a new one.
For people, for reference, roughly what year?
Let's see.
And how old were you? Just roughly.
I was about 9, so born 86.
Early 90s?
Mid 90s.
Yeah.
I got there a little late. The PS1 came shortly after I started gaming.
Yeah.
So like mid 90s, mid to late 90s. We got a Sega, and it was a big deal in our house because I grew up kind of poor. And so it was a huge deal to even get the Sega. And I got so excited because they had a Spider-Man game on there, and I loved Spider-Man at the time, and they had an X-Men game on there, and Wolverine was my favorite character ever when I was a kid.
Hmm.
I still remember the old 80s cartoon. My favorite
Oh
my
yeah,
favorite
I
line
loved
yeah,
that. I loved that.
my favorite line to this day will always be Wolverine going, "Yeah, tell Cyclops I just made him a convertible."
I
Okay.
I love that whole series, that whole animated
Yeah.
series. I remember it, watched it vividly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was brilliantly done. And considering it was a 80s, 90s
Yeah.
animated series, they did it quite well.
Yeah. Um, and I do apologize if I'm a little scattered with this telling, but I'm telling it like I feel it needs to. So,
Yeah,
um,
let it flow.
yeah. And then when I was around, I think it was 97, it came out. So I was like 11 years old. A friend of mine who lived nearby had a PS1, um, and he let me play Final Fantasy VII. And another one of my friends had a PS1 and let me play Final Fantasy Tactics. And those two games set me on a path in a lot of ways. Um, I believe that certain parts of Final Fantasy are very good at teaching uh, like archetypes and whatnot.
Hmm.
Like even in the, like, I love relating things to D&D sometimes. I've been playing D&D since I was 8 years old, so you know,
Yeah,
um, that actually predates Final Fantasy a little bit. Um, but so like the lawful good and all that, and I feel like that is a good way to describe something sometimes, but people are more gray
hmm,
than that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but I remember playing Final Fantasy VII, and like you go through trials and tribulations. You're a hero, a spiky-headed little punk trying to save the world, and it doesn't start that way. You don't start trying to save the world. You don't load the game up with the intent of saving the world, but through several hours of storyline, you learn of, this guy who you knew and who you have a history with is now trying to destroy the world. And since you already hate him, you might as well stop him. And that was a thing. That was a big thing for me. My actions could do something grander. I want to be the one to save the world. I want to be the one to help people in need. Um, Now, looking back on it, 7 is actually one of my least favorite Final Fantasies, which is kind of funny because that's a lot of people's most loved. It is
yeah.
one of the most loved games in the series, and I'm lukewarm on it. And part of the reason I'm lukewarm on it is I'm actually lukewarm on Cloud specifically. I'm not a fan of Cloud.
The
Um,
character.
yeah, the main character,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it part of it is because he comes off very much. He doesn't really want to. He wants to stop Sephiroth, but he's kind of just a whiny pain in the ass most of it. And then the thing that really turns me against him is the movie that came out after. They completely 180'd his whole personality, or not 180, but they reverted his whole personality back to where he was at the beginning of the video game. So it's like everything you did didn't matter. And it's just
Uh,
like all the character growth gone. Why? Because we want him to be edgy and whatever again. It's like, no, you have failed. Um, but Tactics, I loved Tactics. I love the strategy behind Tactics. I love the Final Fantasy Tactics. I'll call it Tactics, but the full name is Final Fantasy Tactics for those who don't know. Um, I love the that got me in love with Final Fantasy's job class system, which,
yeah.
you know, yes, this is a podcast about spiritual stuff, and I'm going to just gush about video games for a minute. Um,
No,
I
it's
love
about both. The whole thing is
that's
it's
fair,
about both.
fair enough. But I love the job system. I love the idea that you're not relegated to the thing you are at birth. You're not Jay the fighter your whole life. You can go through different phases. You can, and that's fine. That's perfectly good. That helps your character growth in the long run.
Hmm.
And I loved playing defensive characters. However, that also gave me a great love for my favorite class in all of Final Fantasy, which is Dragoon. The Lancer who can
The
leap
jumpy,
long
pointy
distances.
guys.
Yes, the jumpy, pointy guys. I love Dragoons, and I play Final Fantasy 14 now. Now that I'm older, I used to play WoW. I switched to 14 a long time ago. I love 14 so much more, and I get to play a Dragoon in 14. Although I'm not allowing myself to because I'm still leveling all my classes to 80, and I know as soon as I get Dragoon to 80, I won't level anymore. So I'm making sure I do that last. Self-discipline.
Fair enough.
That's my reward for getting the rest of it out there.
But it is interesting, and it is something that we will dive more into, that the games that do seem to get to people on those deep levels are usually the ones where there is a class, some kind of class system, especially where there are elements and aspects of personality tied into the class. Now, my starting game came from that too, but I'll let you finish your story first. Well, I gotta make more coffee because I need more coffee.
Fair enough. And then 8 came out, and a lot of people don't like 8, but I found that if I look at 8 as a love story with a Final Fantasy game attached to it, I actually do rather enjoy 8. I think it's a phenomenal love story with a game attached to it. And I learned a lot from that. I learned that maybe I took a couple wrong lessons, but I learned that it's okay, to love someone so much you'll go above and beyond what you would normally do to try to save them. That you ultimately, when you love if you love someone enough, you're willing to make sacrifices for them and do things that aren't safe for them. And by that I mean, like, because in that game, the main female love interest person, Renoa, she's a sorcerer, and like, if things go terribly wrong, which of course they do because it's a Final Fantasy game, she could cause the end of the world, because a sorcerer from a different timeline can manipulate her, blah blah blah. So their plan was to seal her away forever, and the main character drops her off at this thing to be sealed away because that's what she wants to do. And then as he's flying away, he thinks to himself and he goes, no, fuck that. I love this woman, and I'm not going to live knowing that she's locked in a prison forever. And he rushes through a whole bunch of guards, and basically it's fuck whatever consequences are coming. I will deal with them. Like, I cannot be without this person. And that is, a defining kind of thing in my brain sometimes.
It's the hero.
Yeah, it is. It is the hero. It very much is. And then a few years later, my favorite Final Fantasy came out, Final Fantasy 9. And 9 defines who I am in a lot of ways. Because the thing that 9 taught me is you don't necessarily have to be the strongest in the world or whatever to do good and to save it. Because the main character in that game wasn't a knight. He wasn't some big burly soldier boy. He wasn't the top of his class in a military academy. He was a thief. The whole path starts because he tries to kidnap the princess.
Yeah.
And hilarity and whatnot ensue. He tries to kidnap the princess. Turns out the princess wants to be kidnapped because her mom is a crazy psycho. And you go on a long adventure about trying to stop her mother from destroying the world.
That's another big element for what makes a good story and a good game, is that character development.
Yep.
Where a character starts in one form and grows and evolves.
Yep. And so I started to gravitate towards storylines where the main character wasn't the brave, noble knight. Some of my favorite, like, I love the D&D movie, as cheesy and terrible as it was.
Which one?
The one with, what was his name? The guy who played Doc Brown as the main villain.
No idea. I've seen some weird D&D, some animated ones. There was even a choose your own adventure one at one point.
No, this was live action. The live action D&D movie. We still to this day, me and my D&D friends quote lines from it, like, "What you need is a good dwarven woman with a beard you can really hang on to." Love that line. That dwarf is great. But it's the story of two thieves who break into a place and end up on a big adventure together to try to save the world. One of them becomes kind of a paladin by the end, sort of, if I remember correctly. But yeah, just all kinds of stuff.
Cool.
And like Disney movies, one of my favorite Disney movies is Tangled, because the main character is Flint Rider. I love Flint. It's great. Technically, the main character's Rapunzel in that movie. But
yeah. But yeah, so her hero, he went through a lot of growth.
Quote unquote. Yeah.
Yeah. Hero. Yeah.
Frying pans. Who knew, right?
Yes.
Yes. I love the anti-hero. That's what it comes down to, is I love the anti-hero. Punisher is my favorite comic book.
Yeah.
The Punisher is my favorite comic book character. And that being said, it's not a I want to be the Punisher. And I'm going to throw that out now because there's currently something in the real world where a bunch of people did a terrible thing and they use the Punisher symbol. And I don't know all the details, but I know enough to be like, it's not about wanting to be the Punisher. Anybody who even wants to be the good guy should not want to be the Punisher.
Yeah.
Because the reason he is the way he is not because he saw some injustice and decided to fix it. It's because he went through hell. He went through absolute hell, and this is the only way he can deal with it.
Yeah.
And he doesn't necessarily do things for the greater good. He just does things because they're good. And that's a huge difference. There's a huge difference in that.
Never been. Punisher was not one that drew me in. It's a kind of, I won't say against, but it's just, it wasn't. He's a very masculine. Let's just say Punisher is very, very masculine. You don't see, even as the feminine who tend to attach to masculine energies, the Punisher is not one that rises a lot. I'm not saying he doesn't, but it's much, much less than many of the others.
Yeah. But even saying that he isn't the one you should want to emulate, there's a lot of good things you can learn from the way he is.
Yeah.
Like, things like you do good. You get the job done. It doesn't matter how pretty or how perfect it is. You just get it done.
Yeah.
And of course, there are things in life where it does matter how perfect it is, and it does matter how many, whatever happens. But
again, there's stories these are stories to take lessons from, because that's what they all were. The old stories of the old gods. They were told in ways for you to learn a lesson from.
Yeah.
You could say the same for most religious texts. They say don't take these books literally. These are stories in order to deepen your connection to soul, to belief, to whatever it is that you feel you need to connect to.
Yeah. Yeah, and then from Final Fantasies, I've played all of them pretty much since 7 anyway. I've actually gone back and played a lot of the older ones too, but they're a little hard to get into now. Not to say they're bad or anything, it's just I have to be in a certain mindset. Yeah. I don't mind the grind, though.
So much grinding. I don't mind it either. If I need something to just sort of while away the time, I actually don't mind going back to an old game that requires the hardcore grind.
Yeah.
I mean, majority of the new games you don't have to do that we had to do in the old days. Oh yes, I had to grind for 2 weeks to kill that boss.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's like I don't have the time I used to. I remember there were
Yeah.
times in some old Final Fantasies where I just stand in a field and run in circles for 3 hours. I don't have that kind of time anymore.
Yeah, I've done that too.
I've got a 40-hour job and my niece, my small child niece who lives here, who I help take care of, and my wife's parents who um, we took them out of their situation to come live with us and stuff like that.
Yes. Full house.
I don't have time. I don't have time to sit and run in circles for an hour. I have way more important things to be doing.
Yeah.
And so yeah, but and then from there, of course, I graduated to MMOs because WoW became a thing. World of Warcraft, for anyone who doesn't know.
Yeah.
Which most people who listen to this podcast probably will know, but I mean, some might
Just
not.
in case. Yes.
Yeah, just in case.
Just in case.
They'll
know the game. They might not know that. You might not automatically think of the acronym.
Fair enough. But World of Warcraft became a huge, huge influence in my life, to the point where, to detrimental levels. I wasn't as bad as some people who are like forgetting to feed their children because that was a thing that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Addictions are addictions. It doesn't matter what form they take. It's still an addiction.
Fair. But I did play like when I was single and whatnot. And even when I had a girlfriend, I would play, come home from work, play a couple hours, go to bed, get up, play a couple hours, go to work. Like I never didn't go to work, but I did play when I wasn't at work a lot.
Yeah.
And it got me through some hard times. I met some pretty cool people that I don't talk to anymore for the most part. Mostly because our lives all went separate ways. But like I learned a lot of who I am through that game. I learned all about my want and desire to protect people. I play tanks in MMOs. I'm the guy who takes it to the face, so you don't have to.
Yep.
And that's that's what I love to do. I love to be that person out front. I love saying things like, I am the shield that you bash yourself upon, that my enemies shall break themselves upon.
Or Yarrick Smash.
Or yeah, that was D&D. But I went through it, yeah, and I loved playing tanks, and like I've grown and evolved even in my tanking from then. Like I said, I play Final Fantasy, and I'm not the White Knight Paladin, as much as that is the sword and the shield, which is whatever. My favorite one, I leveled Gunbreaker, which is just sword gun boy, but I started doing Warrior recently, and I fell in love with Final Fantasy XIV's Warrior. And literally it's, I have a really big axe and I'm going to hit you with it. No, you're not going to look at him over there. You're going to look at me because I'm hitting you with this big axe. Like that's the whole class. And it's, I love it. I absolutely adore it. And yeah. I mean, we could also go into like when I started my MMO career, I always played the smallest characters ever. And it's probably a reflection of I felt small. But I could do mighty things even being small.
Yeah.
But now I have a tendency to play female characters. And like I mentioned in the last episode, it's not, because they're sexy and I want to look at them. Because again, most of my characters are heavily clad in armor. I think my sexiest outfit on Gwyneth, which is my current character, is a very modest bathing suit with full skirt. And it's because I like when we go fishing, we'll all go fishing, and my whole guild will be like, it's a beach party, wear beach clothes, and so that's what I chose. And like my guild leader, who is a female, is in like a micro bikini running around, and I'm like, okay. I'm gonna be. She's like, you are the most modest person I've ever met, even in a video game, and I'm like, not really, but Yeah, because then she'll hear me say terrible things that I won't repeat on this podcast. Like I upset her so bad the other day. She's like, I don't want to talk to you anymore for the rest of the day, and I'm like, that's fair. But
Oh dear.
yeah, uh, or all our jokes about our married friend, one of our other officers who is married and his wife is about to have a baby. And so he's busy doing things like setting up a nursery and whatnot and preparing for his maternity leave. But we always joke that every time he has to get off, it's because his wife is chaining him to the bed for a while. Uh, but no, and that's, and again, that's the reason I want to create this space. This podcast comes down to the same reason I love my Final Fantasy 14 guild is it's a community in which I can belong. It is a
Yeah.
place where I feel supported and cared about, and like, because I suffer from anxiety. I get real bad anxiety sometimes and depression. And there are times when I withdraw and I withdraw hard.
Yeah.
And this is one of the like, before I found this guild, very few people understood that
Yeah.
and could accept me even with this. Because there are times I'll either drop out for days because I can't be around people.
Yeah.
And there are times when I do terrible things, like to the guild in ways where like I almost throw a temper tantrum and almost leave the guild because I'm upset about something that's irrational and I can't help it. And there's always a private conversation with my guild leader after where she's like, no, I understand because I go through that too.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and they're very accepting of all of my flaws. And that's what I want this space to be for a million other people,
Well, I mean, I totally hear that because when I accidentally ended up as a guild leader, for the throwdown, it was all circumstances and things. But once I'd ended up, and it was just a sister guild for a main guild. But at the end of the day, there was like 4 guilds in the family. But after 18 months, the entire family had dissolved except for us, except for the one that
Yeah.
I was leading. And the term is called holding space. In
Yep.
spiritual terms, we call it holding space. And I ended up going into this guild and I held space. At
Yep.
that particular point, I didn't realize what I was doing, but it was simply putting my energy into this guild so everybody there knew I was there, knew I gave a damn,
Yep.
that I was on top of keeping the guild healthy, and just put that energy into holding it together. And if I noticed one of my people was slipping, to reach out to them. I was Mama Dark
Yep.
for 3 years in this guild, and even the big players who would come and hang out with us, just as like time out, would keep saying that this is, one of the friendliest, nicest, most relaxed and easygoing, but still competitive.
Yep.
Because
Of
we
course,
we
that's because
weren't.
most of them didn't talk to me often.
That was because you kept yourself behind the scenes, kind of deal. But you did your job. You did your siege lord job, which was what I needed you to do.
Yep.
Because siege started at 2 bloody a.m. for me. That's one of the joys of living in Perth. We suck for American times.
Yep.
But yeah, your guild leader has a lot to do with it. How engaged they are, how much they care.
Yep.
Not just about the guild and the game and being competitive, but whether or not they actually give a damn about their people and their players. And you
Correct.
will see huge differences in guilds in the quality of the people that are in there. And even in our guild, where we saw big personalities come in and behave themselves. I mean, there was a couple of players that the shenanigans they got up to
Jeez. Yeah.
we won't mention names because we're not
No.
gonna just on the odd case they might listen to this. But there was some very, very big personalities that would come into our group. They would hang out with us. We'd hear their stories. They never did any of that shit to us. But
Yeah.
what we heard went on in some of the others. It's just like, well, damn, we never see that. And that
Yeah.
was simply because I held the space. And it took me a lot to lose my temper. I think I lost
Yeah.
my shit maybe twice in 3 years.
Something like that. Oh, I lost it every other week. We'd get one of the big personalities to be like, I destroyed this other guild. I'm like, what the are you thinking?
Yeah. Just like, yeah, they thought it was funny. And it's like, oh, you did that to me, I would have cursed your ass.
Yeah, pretty much.
But that's one of the things about the communities is, and there are a lot of really, really good people out there. But a lot of them, especially when you get into those competitive levels,
Yeah.
can get really hardcore and can lose that. I think it's the dehumanizing behind the gamer tags and the not knowing people as real people. You can see the
Yeah.
best and worst of humanity there. So, was there anything else you wanted to go into, or shall I go off on my weird?
Most of the rest of my tangents, I mean, will probably be better served in other episodes.
Weave them back in.
Yeah.
Okay, well, all right. Shall I go into my gaming and exposure and history?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to look at this from a little bit of a different standpoint because the very first spiritual meaning I got from anything, I vaguely remember, and I can't even tell you what this TV show is called. I can't even find evidence of it. But it was back in the very late 70s. So I'm aging myself here. So it was late 70s. I would have been maybe 5. I would have crawled out of bed super early in the morning to go and watch this television show about this superhero woman who used a talisman to draw down the powers of the goddess Isis.
Huh.
It was this obscure TV show. I barely remember. I remember this talisman, this red jewel thing. I don't remember anything else, but that was my first connection to Isis. Now, Isis is the archetype that I tend to work with the most. She's the mystic mama. I'm called mystic mama in a lot of my women's circles and women's groups. So she is the archetype that I resonate with the most. And yeah, I had this really strong connection where I got in trouble when I finally got caught for sneaking out of bed at 5 o'clock or 4:30 or whatever it was in the morning to go and watch this television show. I got into all sorts of trouble, and so it got stopped, and then I never saw it again. Never
Yeah.
saw it again. As television and things like that, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. What was available to us was restricted. I grew up where we had a Betamax video recorder,
Yep.
and I had one movie, and that was The Sound of Music. Yeah, I think I watched part of that movie every day for a year because there was nothing else for me, nothing else to watch, nothing else to do. First video game consoles was the Commodore 64.
Yep.
My aunt and uncle had one of those, but they didn't use it for games. It was a work machine. I did not grow up with video games at all. The only video games I really got exposure to were arcade games.
Yeah.
My grandmother worked at the bowling centre in Perth, and because my grandpa used to pick me up from school, we'd go to the bowling centre. She'd give me maybe $1 or $2 back in the day when it was 20 cents to play a video game or an arcade game. And we're talking things like, Pac-Man, Galaga, really old, basic stuff, especially back in the starts. Then I think I had a very, very rough year. I think it was about 14 or 15. It ended with my grandpa was passing away. I'd lost my dog. I had a part-time job and I decided I was going to get myself a console, a game console. And I asked my uncle who knew about these things, and he told me to get I think it was a Master System, Sega Master System,
Yep.
or a Mega Drive or something like that. And
I know the Master System is about that time.
yeah, so it was the Master. I was pretty sure it was the Master System. And really all I played was platform
Yeah.
games, very, very basic type stuff. Was never really into any of that. Then I met my husband when I was 15, and he was a gamer. Now, he'd played a little bit of D&D, but we never really got into that. But he
Oh,
started introducing me. Sorry?
I got heavily into that my whole life. Like, I remember
Well, he
I
started
got it.
playing
Go ahead.
sorry. No, just
No.
say he started playing about the same age that you started playing. Of course, he's
Yeah.
older than you, so it was before that. But
Yeah.
he and his friends kind of didn't play anymore. We kind of did one thing, but nothing really happened after that, and it just didn't. He kept saying, yeah, we're going to do this one day, and 30 years it didn't bloody happen until you
Yeah.
came along and said, let's play D&D, and he's like, yeah. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, I used to, like, back when I started when I was 8, we used to play in my friend's little shed behind his house every single day after school for like an hour.
Cool.
For like 3 years I did that. And then like I've tried to get other circles of groups of people in the game. And then like when we moved out of there, all I had is the player's handbook. So I asked for my birthday one year to get the monster manual and the DMG,
The
and
Dream Guide, yep.
my mom got me the wrong edition, and so I had to go buy
Oh,
another player's
no.
manual for the right edition. Well, because I was playing 2.5 and 3.0 came out, and she didn't know.
Of
And that's
course,
fair.
moms don't
Like, so she
always.
got them to me, and she's like, "Are these the right ones?" And I'm like, "No, but that's perfectly fine. I'll just buy a player's handbook. It's not the end of the world." I
Yeah.
wanted to play the new edition anyway. Um, and she
Well,
was
anyway,
always, sorry,
that's
to
right.
cut one of the big differences I meant to mention earlier when you were talking about your life, how you weren't
Mhm.
allowed to, basically you weren't allowed to be perceived as insane. My life was kind of different in that way because I come from a family where we know we're crazy. We understand this fact, and that's fine. We embrace it.
Yeah.
Like my
The
grandpa,
difference between your family crazy and my family
yeah,
crazy is my family is lock up crazy.
yeah,
Legitimate lock up. They've been locked away crazy.
yeah,
Not just
that's
the,
fair.
hey, we're weird and bizarre. It's like,
Hmm.
no, 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 no. Be normal or they'll lock you up.
Yeah,
That kind of crazy.
where like
So
there's stories about my grandpa cutting down trees in his underwear because it was too hot out with a chainsaw when my mom came home, and mom's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, I'm cutting down trees." And she's like, "Why are you naked?" And he's like, "I'm not naked. I'm wearing whitey tighties." Like,
my mum did something like that, but she was up a ladder, cutting branches away from the power lines in the middle of a cyclone.
yeah, yeah. Like my mom was the one who was like, "Oh, there's a tornado out. Should we go to the tornado shelter?" No, we're just gonna lay down on the ground in our trailer, and if it takes the trailer, well, we get to go for a ride. Like, but Ma, the storm shelter. She's like, "Shut up and lay on the ground." And I'm like, "Okay." We
Anyway,
yeah.
we've digressed a fair bit there. So I'm going
Sorry.
to take us back to yeah. Anyway, hubby started introducing me to games on the computer. Now this was back when it was a four color monitor. The
Yep.
very first thing was a game called Castle,
I think I've
which
heard of it.
yeah, it was legitimately you are a square, this little
Yep.
pixel, and you just had to move around this castle and collect things or whatever. I
Ooh,
found that interesting.
I think they
But the
actually
two
mentioned that in Ready Player
games,
One.
there are two games. Yeah, that was the where they had you had to find that secret room.
Yep.
So, because I
Yep.
actually knew where that was. I actually knew where
Yep.
that was because I'd seen that. Um, but the two games that got me really hooked on RPGs and the expanse of it. The first one was one called Heroes Quest, which was a little bit
Yes.
more restricted. We originally again played it when it was only four color. It was really really basic. Oh my god, an Antwerp.
Yeah.
Um,
I
you
really
know,
want to play the board game version of Heroes Quest.
I didn't know there was a board game version.
There is.
Ooh.
It's from about that era. They've released many expansions. You can't find it anywhere now. However, you can get all of the books for it and whatnot online. They have the PDFs for it. But you would get the box, and the box would have a single map tile, and so all of the rooms were based on the same room layout, except you
Yeah.
would put like little fake walls here and there, and the doors would change where they are. And they had a bunch
Mhm.
of stand-up doors that you would set to show where all the doors were, and then when they'd open a door, you would pull it off the map and put down an open door, and they were like 3D models of them. And you had your little like D&D minifigs,
Yep.
and you had a bunch of enemies minifigs. And then they had things like tables and chairs and stuff that you would put throughout the room, and they were like full 3D models of tables and chairs and whatnot. Because of
Wow.
course, not a lot of people know this. Hero Quest was made by the same people who make Warhammer. It actually takes place in the same universe, I believe.
Oh,
And so Games Workshop is huge about selling figures. Like that is what they do.
wow.
Um, yeah,
Was not
I
aware
know
of any of
most.
that.
Yeah, I know most of this because Loading Ready Run loves to play Heroes Quest, and watching them play it made me really want to play Heroes Quest.
Because yeah, originally we played it when it was only like the 4 colors, and then they re-released it full color. Well, full color, it was 16 or whatever it
Yeah,
was that
yep.
they re-released it as. It was so much better. The graphics were so much better.
Yeah,
But and yeah, I knew that game off by heart. I played it quite a bit. But the
yeah,
game that really, I think, really changed everything for me for gaming, and now I'm really aging myself because this game is older than you, was Ultima 4. Now, I never played Ultimas 1 through 3. I think I played Ultima 5. I vaguely remember Ultima 6. 7 Part 2 were the shit. I loved those two. They were amazing. 8 was interesting, but not on the same level as 7 and 7 Part 2. But Ultima 4 goes back to it really was one of those class games,
yeah,
because and it was a very basic game. I mean, it was
yeah.
1985 this game was released, I think.
Yeah,
And
that was the
you
year before I
had,
was born, so it is older than me.
yeah,
You are correct.
you had 8 virtues. And at the start
Ah,
of the game, they asked you a bunch of questions that if you answer honestly, you will be assigned your virtue. And the goal of Ultima 4 was not so much about being the hero, but being the spiritual leader,
ah,
about embodying the virtues,
yeah.
and I don't ask me, this was 30 years ago, but it was things
Mhm.
like spirituality, honor, no, truth, love, and courage was something else, but there was, sincerity and compassion and blah, blah, blah. And the way you answer sort of question, you got a class associated with that particular alignment, and then you had to go and purify and embody those
Yeah,
different virtues. And yeah, it 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 was such an engrossing little game. It was so basic. It was just little pixel things that you slid across the screen, and it. But this whole embodiment of these virtues really spoke to me on a deep level. And again, it goes back into that whole archetype. Whenever a game has enough story that the archetypes exist, this is where it starts calling us in, because they're those elements that call us into
hmm
soul. I mean, since then, I used to play a lot. There was a lot of games I used to play to vent my shadow side,
yeah,
because I had to grow up being such a good girl, and when I was working as the pure white light, unicorn fart and rainbows psychic, my shadows needed to come out somewhere.
yeah,
So I would play games that either allowed me to be evil aligned or had the consequences where I could be a bitch or a complete psycho or just go on a killing spree.
yeah.
Um, I used to find racing games as well to a way to vent frustrations, and I didn't mind a good race.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Before the recording started, and yeah, I don't have that same, like, I can't play an evil character. I cannot find it in me, which is really funny because I do want to play an evil D&D wizard in a good campaign, but I have a hard time playing the villain.
Let's put it this way, since I've done a lot more integration work, and since I've more encompassed and started incorporating my shadows and working through them and whatnot, that need is not there anymore. There is still the vent frustration. I mean, my game of choice, I'm a Creed girl. I love Assassin's Creed. It's the only real system that series that I still play completely. And that's because for me, it does speak to me on a soul level. The historical aspects speak to me on a soul level, the ability to explore the pyramids, the ability to climb the bloody Colosseum, those sorts of things. I love that. And every now and then I just want to kill something, and I can do that in Creed. That allows for that aspect.
Yeah.
But there's a whole lot that goes into about the archetypes and the type of character that I like to play there too. But that's next week's episode that we're going to go into a bit more. I mean, I didn't mind a fun game, but the ones I found that had the soul call are the ones that have the class, that have the choices, the alignment, and the deep stories that allow the character development, and as well as the embodiment of whatever archetype it is that you feel that need to embody.
Yeah. I was thinking about it while you were talking, and I am aware a Hero Quest board game exists. I'm not 100% sure if it's the same as the video game. Because then you start talking about Ultima having classes, which made it sound like Heroes Quest didn't, but I know the board game does.
No, from memory, the old Heroes Quest, it was just, there was no class. You were just this guy, and you had to do these things.
Oh yeah, I think I know the game. Yeah, I think they're not related, but there is a Heroes Quest board game, and it is fantastic.
I haven't seen that.
But you play like a
barbarian for it.
Yeah, it's a barbarian, a wizard, a dwarf, and an elf. Because that's back in the day when those were classes instead of races, which was weird. Because that's even in a D&D's history. And you go through a dungeon, and one of the taglines is, this item cannot be used by the wizard.
Yeah, no, that wasn't Heroes Quest. The Heroes Quest, it was a very basic map type system that you had to move through. You had to defeat a whole bunch of, I can't even remember originally what the premise was, because it's been so bloody long. But there was a I remember the weird ass castle that you had to answer riddles, which were actually the game security, that you had to get the answers from the instruction book.
Yeah, because now that I think about it, I think the Heroes Quest you're referring to is in the same line as Dragon's Quest. Or they're tangentially related or something. I don't remember.
It was made by the same people that did Space Quest, if that makes...
Yeah, it did Sierra Games. I think
Sierra it was Sierra. Thank you. Yes, it was
Space
Sierra.
Quest, King's Quest. They did King's Quest.
Yes, King's Quest.
Did not know they did a Heroes Quest as well.
Heroes Quest was probably one of the more, well, at least I thought it was one of the more popular. I couldn't get into the other two.
Yeah, no, the two most popular by far that I know of were Kings and Space.
Space, yeah. And yet I couldn't get into those. I got into Heroes. It's weird, isn't it? And again, that goes into what we're talking about on those deeper levels. And another thing I think we do need to just sort of get clear: we're not saying that the only games that should exist are games with deep stories and archetypes and spiritual development. Hell no. Like I said, I love a good race game.
Yeah, I played Tony Hawk. There's no deep storyline or character creation. You're just on a skateboard going wee.
And there's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah.
I love a good race game. Need for Speed. I love Need for Speed. Although my personal preference was, I used to love Burnout.
Yeah.
Burnout was my favorite. But I can also admit that there was a very long time my favorite game was Carmageddon.
Yeah.
And yeah, the original Carmageddon was banned in some countries.
Yeah. Road Rash. I remember playing Road Rash when I was a kid.
Road Rash, what was that one?
You were on a motorcycle and you'd pick up different weapons, and you could like one of them was a chain where you'd whip the bike next to you with a chain to try to knock
Oh, I
them off
don't.
their bike. It was very violent very violent for a
Yeah,
game of its time. Now it kind of looks
yeah.
very tame and whatnot.
And
But
that was the same thing with Carmageddon. I mean, Carmageddon was late 90s. For those who are not aware of the original Carmageddon, because
yeah,
they re-released Carmageddon 2000 where it was cows, and cows and animals and things like that. But the original Carmageddon, you won a race three ways. You either won the race, you destroyed all your opponents, or you killed all the pedestrians.
yeah, yeah. But no, like even games like I play Grand Theft Auto, so like that's the going to the you don't always have to play a game that's good and you're the hero
Yeah.
and whatnot. I have a hard time playing the villain, but yet I can play Grand Theft Auto. I don't get it.
And yeah,
Um,
I'm one of those. I can go on a massive killing spree and kill off a whole bunch of innocent townsfolk and whatnot, but I can't do Grand Theft Auto. I
yeah.
can't. It to
Well, and
me
it's
that's just I don't know if it's because it's too real, and that's
yeah,
where I get stuck. It's too realistic. I'm
yeah,
good with over the top violence if it is just full blown fiction.
and that's
But
fair.
once it gets real, I struggle.
Well, I think for me it has to do with I have a hard time hurting people's feelings. And I think
Mm.
that's what it boils down to because I was thinking about it while we were talking, and like I can play an evil character in Fable where I sacrifice children to get a bow.
Yep.
I can do that just fine. Doesn't bother me. But
Oh yeah.
being a jerk to somebody in Mass Effect, I'm just like, why am I such an asshole? I can't know. Like,
And again, I think it has a lot to do with that interactiveness
yeah,
too. But I do think that sometimes we do need to be able to vent that shadow
yeah,
side of ourselves. And yeah, video games give us, I mean, games in general give us that ability to be, to be those darker elements that we all have within. It's just
yeah,
good to have a good, healthy way to vent them. And games are brilliant for that.
yeah,
Brilliant way
yeah.
to
And
tap
they're
into those and release those shadow sides of selves. It's no different to a sporty person going out and kicking the shit out of a kick bag or something
yep,
like that. It's exactly the same energies behind it. There's aggression that
yep.
needs to be vented. And when we go into and deeper into the archetypes and things like that, there's
Or
there's really sorry?
or my way to you're talking about sporty people kicking a kickback. I was gonna say my way to release it, which is axe throwing.
That's right. Yeah, it's the same thing. I mean, going for a hardcore run for a couple of hours, anything that exudes a lot of physical, violent physical force can be an incredible release of stress and energy and tension. And so
Yep.
that's something that the gaming can give us. Again, when done from that healthy place. Obviously, if you've got issues, you should seek help. But you know,
Correct.
there are it does give the majority of us just a place to, you know what, I had a shit day. I'm going to go and kill something. It's
Yeah.
best that happens in a game.
Yep.
And yeah, knowing that there's a lot of meaning that can be drawn from this. Everyone who says, "Oh no, it's just a game and it's stupid and it doesn't mean anything," no, 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 it can actually mean a lot because these are your stories, the
Hmm.
stories that resonate and relate to you.
Yeah. And sometimes you make up your own stories, and sometimes, it's just a goal to complete.
Exactly. And sometimes it will be deep and meaningful and moving and can change your life. I mean, there are elements and things that have come up in pop culture that have changed things.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be something simple and sometimes it can be something complex. And oddly, the thing that is coming to my mind right in this moment is Buffy.
Yeah. My brain went to Star Wars.
Yeah, Star Wars certainly did to a degree, but Buffy was it was a little bit more easy to point out. Even
Mm,
in Australia, when Buffy the Vampire Slayer was huge, it changed the way we talked.
yeah, Star Wars did that here quite a bit, still does. But
To a degree, but there was language and elements of language that the Buffy series, I mean, maybe it was bigger, maybe teenagers already spoke like that in the US, but they
maybe.
didn't in Australia until Buffy came out. And then the way Buffy and her friends spoke to each other, all of a sudden everybody was talking that way.
Fair.
So, these things have huge impacts on our lives and on us in our society, not just, on those personal levels. So we need to, and again, not necessarily saying you have to watch everything or only watch and play and interact and do things that are deeply meaningful,
No.
but to be aware of what is good and healthy and what is just fun.
Yeah. And of course, different things will speak to you different ways. Something that
And
resonates with me or resonates with you isn't going to resonate with someone else. Sorry.
exactly. Exactly. That isn't exactly the good point. The other point to say is what resonates with you at one point will not always resonate with you because we're all on a period or all on a path of growth and evolution. So whereas once upon a time I could be horrible and horrifically evil in games, and I used to love horror movies, absolutely adored a good, gory, over the top horror movie. I can't do them anymore.
Yeah,
I
never
just
been a
can't.
fan.
And I used to love them. I grew up, 11, 12. It was, my mum wouldn't allow a lot of things, but she would let me watch horror movies
Yeah.
from a very young age. I was allowed to watch horror movies. So that was something completely, and I loved them. Now I can't deal with them. If they, as a high level empath and a working psychic, especially the ones that have some realism.
Yeah.
Give me a zombie apocalypse movie, yeah, no worries. Z Nation loved that. That was hilarious. Anything that is remotely realistic, yeah, I struggle. I struggle when it starts getting dark and horrific. I really do. I don't like
Yeah.
watching anything where people are horrible to each other anymore. That's part of our own personal evolution. Some people, yeah, like me, get to that stage where we just can't, and other people, you'll just evolve what your tastes and what aligns with you on those energetic levels will change and shift and
Yep.
adjust as you move through different things.
Yeah, I can't watch horror movies, and that's part of the, vague precognition is I will begin to watch it and be like, he's the bad guy, he's the killer, he survives, he doesn't. Like right at the beginning of the movie, we'll get to the end and I'm right, and I'm like, that took all of it out of me for me. Or all of it
Yeah.
out of it for me.
Yeah, I don't like that predictable aspect of it too, but I also don't like it when they go so stupid with the storyline. It's just like, now this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
I've always been able to do that even on things where other people like we'll start the movie and I'll be like, he's the killer, and they'll be like, how do you know that? I'm like, just trust me, watch it.
yeah,
And my favorite moment of that was when this isn't horror, but when Final Fantasy 15 came out, it came with a little movie, and I watched the movie first, and I pointed at one of the characters and I turned to my wife and said, I'm going to kill that man. And he turned out to be the end boss of the game.
yeah. I'm like that in Creed. Every time I play an Assassin's Creed, it's just like, I want to kill him and I want to kill him now. It's going to save me a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Can't I kill them? Can't I kill them right now? Because I know this person's going to do something. I know it. And they're just like, no, 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 no. It's just like, no, it's this one. And sure enough, every time it's just like, oh. But
Yeah.
then again, of course, I wouldn't have a story in a game to play if I'd killed them at that particular point. But yeah, you're sitting there as a player going, I can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to try and, nah, it's you, and I want to kill you now.
Yeah.
But that's that intuition and that empathy that comes up. But also too, there's those formulaics. Sometimes
Yep.
the gaming industry, like the movie industry, are not always the most original. But in saying that, there
Oh
isn't
no.
really
Yeah.
any original stories left anymore. It's just original ways to tell the stories.
Fair.
So, yeah. Trying to figure, is there anything else that needs to be woven in today? My nose is starting to dribble.
Yeah. Yeah. Heads up. She's not feeling well. She's got a cold. A little under
I've
the
got a
weather.
cold. No, it's not the Rona. It's just a cold because it's cold and wet and miserable here in Perth. We've had the wettest couple of days for
Yeah.
20 years. So if you can hear my window rattling and the wind howling, it's because it's yucky outside.
Yeah. And so I asked her if she was still up to recording. She said, yeah, we're probably going to be recording a couple today because we're trying to get a good backlog started before we even release the first one.
Yep.
To give us a buffer. And
A
that was our
buffer
plan
too
for
to
today.
feel everything in. Yep.
Yeah.
Just make sure too, guys, that check below that you'll find links to our Facebook page and our group where we are trying to form this community, where Jamie and I will hold space, where we can connect, where we can talk about games, spirituality, pop culture, and our stories.
Yep. And a Discord. I will definitely make a Discord.
Okay.
These are all things that we need to still do ahead of time, but we have
Mm-hmm.
planned for a website, a Discord, and a Facebook, at least.
Yep. At least at this stage. And then we will see what expands from there.
Yeah.
Please, by all means, leave your comments, leave any feedback, and leave any questions that you have, anything you would like us to dive into and expand upon or go into at a later date. I will be weaving the spiritual and the soul stuff in. I will try not to go too crazy lady deep, but of course, if you guys want more deep, just ask me and I can dive into some depths.
Yeah.
Or we could even take that in a different direction through the groups in the Facebook if that's a necessary path too. But whatever serves.
Yeah.
Whatever serves you guys.
Yep. So yeah, that's all I got.
Yep, I think it feels a good place to leave this week.
Fair enough. So
And
everyone,
our next episode we'll be talking about classes.
yeah, what your class says about you spiritually.
Yeah, on
mostly.
spiritually, personality, archetype.
Yep.
Yeah, both your light and shadow sides. So
yep.
that,
So yeah,
that should be
look forward
fun.
to it.
Yeah, awesome.
I think this was enough useless rambling at the end of the episode. Everyone have a lovely day.
Take care of yourselves.